This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast presented by Medi-Share. Together, we'll unpack fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson with Harrison Zuckerberg, and we are your fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while also finding meaning and purpose throughout the fantasy season. We won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing. And man, I have not been right in a lot of different ways. So we will talk all about it today. We are 5 weeks into the fantasy season. Last night's Monday Night Football game had lots of fantasy implications. Like I said last week, Travis Kelce, he's the one guy you want. He is the ultimate game changer. He is the number one guy in fantasy, and he showed you yet again, week in, week out, year after year, absolute domination. So glad to be with you today. The Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast presented by Medi-Share is a part of the Unpacking It Podcast Network. I'm coming to you from the Unpacking It Ministry studio in Charlotte, North Carolina. And thanks to all of you that are members of Fantasy Football Fellowship. If you aren't yet, you can go to fantasyfootballfellowship.com and get access to the weekly breakout topics and a lot of great content for you. Today on the show, we will do another weekly breakout. This week, it's all about injuries. The injuries that we are dealing with as fantasy managers, and how does that relate to the injuries that we're dealing with in life? The difficulties, the challenges, the tough circumstances that each of us deal with at certain times. Sometimes it's a temporary injury that may cost us a couple weeks, and then oftentimes it's a season-ending type injury that it's a long season of suffering, and so we deal with this kind of stuff. And so, how do we respond? And what does the Bible have to say about it? So we will get into that in just a little bit, but unfortunately, we will have to talk about injuries throughout the show because injuries continue to affect a lot of players and a lot of fantasy teams. And I know for me, dealing with a few. Last night, Darren Waller going out early did not help me. That was disappointing. And so we'll get into that today. We are brought to you by Medi-Share. Check out medishare.com/unpacking it. If you're looking for an affordable, reliable healthcare option that you can trust, check out Medi-Share today. Medishare.com/unpacking it. All right. We begin each show with some fantasy shenanigans. Crazy matchups, guys who helped us, killed us, guys we went up against, tight matchups. And I will let Harrison get us started with that. But Harrison, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I'm super hyped after last night because for the first time this season, I went 3-0 in my fantasy leagues. I got a couple 2-1 weeks to start out the year, but I have yet to go 3-0. And that's because going into this week, I was winless in one of my leagues. I was 0-4. It was not looking good for me. But I made a couple trades this week, kind of shook things up after Javonte Williams got injured. And going into last night, I was down 13 with Derek Carr starting as my QB. He had an electric first drive and then did nothing for the rest of the game, was sitting right at like 11 or 12 points until the final drive in the fourth quarter when he had a absurd kind of jump pass. I don't even know what it was to Devontae Adams for the 50-yard touchdown. Won me my week. I am now 1-4, no longer, winless, the worst team in the league. And what's even crazier is the team that I beat was the only undefeated team in the league. And he was talking a lot of trash going into the matchup because he was in first place. I was in last place. But anything can happen on any given receipt. And, just like Robert Saleh says, we kept the receipts. We remembered who doubted us when we were down. We got our win this week. And we're looking forward to a comeback for the rest of the season.
I like it. I like the optimism. I'm on the opposite end, had a really bad fantasy week. And I will say this, I'm thankful that a lot of my injured players are more on the week-to-week type level. So it's not full-on panic, but it is high concern across my leagues. But I will share this shenanigans going on. And so this is my longest running league, 19 years. I went into this season thinking, wow, I had an awesome draft. I'm feeling good. And let me just fill you in on what this roster looks like. So DJ Moore, we know the debacle in Carolina. Russell Wilson, total disaster. Darren Waller, injured. Rashad Bateman, injured. Jonathan Taylor, injured. Pat Freiermuth, injured. Damian Harris, injured. So that's what I've been dealing with on what I thought was going to be my best team, and it is the most concerning team at this point. And I still do have hope, though. I still have hope that Jonathan Taylor will live up to that number 2 pick where I took him. I still have I have Travis Etienne in this league. A lot of hope that Travis Etienne is turning the corner, and we're already seeing more action with him and more volume, and so the excitement that we all had for James Robinson is waning, and now it's time for Travis Etienne. So that's given me a glimmer of hope in that league. But overall, tough week, and so we'll jump into some accountability, and so we always like to share, hey, where have we been wrong? Where are we missing? And for me, in the offseason, I was so high on A.J. Dillon, so excited about A.J. Dillon. And so far, he has been a huge disappointment. And I have to blame the Packers. I can't blame Dillon. I can't blame myself. I have to blame the Packers because it is ridiculous that Aaron Jones too, both of them are such great runners, yet they're not getting enough carries. And they've got Rodgers throwing all over the place, but not as high efficiency that you'd like. Guys, we've talked about the receivers a lot. I still like Romeo Doubs. Lazard is fine. But the 2 best players on this team from a weapon standpoint are Jones and Dillon, and they're just not getting it enough. And so for me, with Dillon, I talked about him, hey, you got to draft him. And so I'll hold myself accountable to that. At the same time, I'm not ready to give up on him. And last year we saw down the stretch what he did to carry fantasy owners and the Packers. I still expect that to happen again, but I wish the Packers would wake up a little bit earlier and make this happen earlier in the season. In what ways do you need to hold yourself accountable today?
So I will also hold myself accountable to Aaron Jones because I thought he was going to be a smash amazing pick for the Packers. And he's been disappointing so far, except for that one game where pretty much all of his fantasy points came for the season against the Bears. But I would not get too worried. I would say that A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones are almost buy candidates right now. Because when you look at the Packers in terms of, yards per carry, rushing yards per game, they're one of the top rushing offenses in the NFL. They just haven't scored touchdowns running the ball, which is a really weird thing when you have both Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, who have been, red zone monsters so far in their career. Aaron Jones only has 2 touchdowns. Both of those came against the Bears as a guy who's usually a double-digit touchdown guy every single year. So even though it's been concerning so far, their offense has been, just really kind of stagnant and weird. It's almost like all of the top offenses in the NFL. You look at Tampa Bay, you look at the Chargers for a little bit, the Broncos, the Packers. They've all just been really, meh. They haven't been terrible. They haven't been great. They've just been meh. I think the Packers will figure it out, though, going into the season, especially after a loss like this. Aaron Jones is going to go to Matt LaFleur and be like, you know what? I'm Aaron Rodgers. We need to get the ball to Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. They're our 2 best players. You let me call the plays. Let me figure it out. You don't really know what you're doing here. I'm the Hall of Fame quarterback. So I would not give up hope yet.
No, and I think it's a good point that they needed this loss. Like this loss allows them to make the proper adjustments because Aaron Rodgers mentioned it last week. Hey, this kind of winning isn't sustainable. And then now they've lost. And oftentimes this is what it takes for teams to really say, all right, we got to make some, significant adjustments.
And if
so I think
you're looking
at
the division too, the Vikings, the Lions, the Bears, you weren't really feeling threatened, even though the Bears and Vikings have respectable records at this point. Packers weren't feeling threatened by any of those teams. Now that they've lost, they are neck and neck with the Vikings in terms of the standings in the division right now. I think this is a real wake-up call for them where, all right, we cannot just coast in this division anymore and win, go 11-6, 10-7 and get into the playoffs. We actually have to put our foot down and hit the gas and really, ride Aaron Rodgers and our stars for the rest of the season to make sure we win this division.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing I've been wrong about and will own up to, the New York Jets. Wow. They're putting up some great numbers and especially Breece Hall. Awesome game. And he could have had 2 more touchdowns, but Michael Carter vultured him. So really, both of them have been fantasy relevant. We're talking about Dillon and Jones. Man, Hall and Carter, that's the duo that you want. So those 2 guys have been great, and they're young guys, and I would expect this type of production to be more regular. I really do. Now, I don't think it's going to be every week, but I think the Jets they're in the mix. Like they're not a terrible team. They're not a great team, but they're right there, sort of an average team, and they're going to give you some good weeks based on the matchups for us in fantasy. And then you mentioned the Bucs. No, they're not great. This offense has not been great this year. But Leonard Fournette, somebody that I avoid, I always downplay, I give him a hard time. He led the running backs this week. Him and Austin Eckler were the top running backs. Josh Jacobs right there behind him. But a big week for Leonard Fournette. So I'll own up to that as well. All right, Harrison, what are you most excited about today? What are some things that you feel like, man, I'm doing? I got that right. I'm feeling on track with these players.
All right, so the first one for me is the Cowboys defense this week. Now, I know you don't like playing defense, but in 2 of my leagues, I have to play a defense. And this week, even though they were going up against the Rams, who, usually have an electric offense, I picked up the Cowboys defense, and they got me 22 points this week, putting on an absolutely electric performance, winning me one of my games. And it always feels good when, not one of your star players, but someone, a defense, a kicker, something that's not really sustainable for the season, but the random, player on your team puts up a huge game and wins you your week. So I'm feeling good about the Cowboys defense. And another good feeling I have is a trade that I made earlier this week. So I traded Justin Herbert and Brandon Cooks for Derek Carr, Chris Godwin, and Damian Harris. Now, Damian Harris is injured. We'll see what happens there. But the reasoning behind that was Herbert, we thought, was going to be a top 2 QB this season. He's been really good. He's been solid, but he hasn't been that, elite difference maker at the QB position like the Josh Allens, Lamars, and Hurts did. So it's not really worth it to me to have, the number 5 or 6 QB on my roster when I can get a guy like Derek Carr who's going to put up really good numbers as well, even though he's not, Herbert. And then also get a Chris Godwin, someone who I think is going to explode this season later on with, Tom Brady just force feeding him targets over the middle. So I made that trade. I got a lot of hate in my league making that trade. Oh, how could you trade away Herbert for Derek Carr? Oh, Godwin's been injured all season. How did you take him in? Carr and Godwin got me 18 and 13 points, and Herbert got 14 and 6 points this week with Brandon Cooks. I won. The team that I traded Herbert and Cooks to lost. So I'm feeling great about the trade that I made, and everyone else can shut up. They don't know what they're talking about. I made the good trade. My team got the win this week.
All right. So I'm glad you're feeling good after 1 week, but I would not trade Justin Herbert. I'm hanging on to him. And what I was thinking about today, and I'm going to put this in our Fantasy Football Fellowship weekly newsletter, is it's obvious, but we have to remind ourselves, you want elite players on your team. And you don't want to give up on elite players, especially players that you drafted in the first 3 rounds. Now, if they're injured and they're out for the year, obviously that's different. But if you're like Justin Jefferson, for a couple of weeks, we were all concerned about Justin. He's fine. Okay, Austin Eckler, we were a little concerned. He's fine. I feel that way with Jonathan Taylor. I feel that way. I actually drafted Travis Etienne early, AJ Dillon early. Like these kind of guys, I still feel good about. And so I would put Justin Herbert in that category too. I personally wouldn't want to give up on him. Now, you made a good trade, but just in general, that just reminds me and just to encourage everybody, it's only 5 games. Don't give up on the top talent. Like you want those guys that have already shown it in the past. The chances are they're going to do it again. That's your best indicator. And it's cute to have Geno Smith right now. It's cool. Hey, great. Good for you. You've had some big games from Geno Smith. If you're expecting Geno Smith to win you a fantasy championship, I'm not willing to trust that. I personally, I've never seen that happen. I'm not willing to do that. So there you go. What I'm most excited about, speaking of, now, today's theme is all about injuries today. And so I don't want anybody to get injured. But as a fantasy manager who tries to avoid injury-prone guys, especially guys that always seem to be out for a long time, Rashad Penny was that guy for me. And I was like, I don't want Penny. Well, he had a big week last week, and now he's out. And it's a bummer for him. It's devastating. But from a fantasy perspective, from me, that's something I feel right about. Okay. You hate to celebrate somebody else's injury, but from that standpoint, we'll talk about Ken Walker in a moment. And then same with Mike Thomas. Like Mike Thomas, everybody was all excited about getting him, at a good value during the draft. Most people drafted him, later on, 6th, 7th, 8th round. But I avoided him. And so far, he's had a couple decent games, but it's the injury concerns with him still. So, and then lastly, I'm really excited about Derek Carr. To your point, you went and got him. He's got at least 2 touchdowns, 240 passing yards in 4 of 5 games this season. So that's pretty good. All right, let's jump into what we're convinced of today. And Harrison, I will let you start. What are you convinced of?
So this is a little bit more of a specific I'm convinced. After watching a Thursday night football game with the Broncos, I was a big advocate for Mike Boone going into this week, picking him up. I thought he was the clear better back over Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon got a lot of the work in that game, but was extremely inefficient. Mike Boone was way more efficient than him. So I am convinced that Mike Boone is going to break out this week.
Ooh, I like
He had a pretty nice game, but what was really telling was he was the clear third down passing back. Anytime it was a passing situation, he was on the field. He looked electric catching the ball out of the backfield. Now they play the Chargers this week, who have allowed the most points of any team to fantasy running backs. Russell Wilson is also injured, so he is going to be checking down the ball a lot to Mike Boone. They got an elite pass rush in LA and Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, so he's got to be throwing those short passes, get it out of his hands. I think Mike Boone is going to have like a 7 or 8 reception game and go wild this week. Now, I'm not saying he's going to have like 30 points, but I think he's going to have a really solid game, and everyone's going to forget about Melvin Gordon and all of his fumbles and inefficiency. He's washed, and Mike Boone is going to become the guy there after this week in Denver.
I'm okay with that. Overall, I'm so out on Denver. I can't run far away from them enough. Like they make me so nervous. That was so ugly on Thursday night. We'll see what this shoulder shot turns out to be for Russell Wilson. But overall, Denver makes me really nervous. But with Mike Boone, I think you can put him in at flex this week and roll the dice to what you're talking about. That's pretty good. Here's what I'm convinced of. The majority of quarterback performances, especially this past week, are so unpredictable and confusing. Now, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, you're top 3 guys. But after that, we're talking Gene number 4, Kirk Cousins number 5, Carson Wentz number 6. We're talking about benching Carson Wentz in Washington. Yet he was the 6th scoring fantasy quarterback ahead of Tom Brady, who was next, and then Joe Burrow. And then Jimmy Garoppolo is top 10. Marcus Mariota is top 10. And then you scroll all the way down. And there's your boy, Justin Herbert at 18. You got Matthew Stafford, 23. Russell Wilson, 24. Wilson puts up 11. Stafford, 11. Even Jared Goff, who had been lighting it up, scores 6. It is beyond confusing and in some ways frustrating too, because a lot of these situations, it's like, oh, well, the matchup should be good. Like they should be fine. Oh yeah, they'll have a good week. I'm gonna put this quarterback in, and it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. So if you do have one of those top 3 guys, you're loving life. After that, good luck. And I wish I had the answers. Even somebody like Trevor Lawrence, we started feeling good about. Now I figured they would run the ball a lot against Houston, but then that turned out to be such a low scoring game, very little production. And so then Trevor Lawrence only put up 12 fantasy points. So anyway, the quarterback position has been absolutely wild this year. And with I'll couple that with what I said earlier. I still, in the long run, looking at the course of the season, I'm still going to trust the go-to guys. And Joe Burrow, I'm still going to trust him. Even Lamar Jackson didn't put up much. He had 15 points. I'm still going to trust Lamar Jackson, Herbert, and those kind of guys. Now, Stafford, Russell Wilson, there's some panic there. There definitely some panic. Jared Goff, it was fun for a while. Now he is who we think he is. So any thoughts on that, Harrison, with the quarterback position?
Yeah, people who went, QB early in the first couple rounds, when all of us as quote unquote fantasy experts say, oh no, you have to wait on QB. There's so much value at QB. Well, there's value at QB if you want 11 and 12 points per game from your quarterback, because that's pretty much what's happened this season. You have the top 3 or 4 guys, and after that, everyone is just terrible. You might as well be starting Taysom Hill at quarterback if he's classified as a quarterback in your league. Like, it has been brutal if you were in that QB streaming late round QB boat, unless you got Geno Smith, which is a very few people actually bought into Geno Smith. I know a lot of people now are and will probably pick him up this week. But it makes us reevaluate going into these next couple seasons. Do you get the elite quarterbacks in fantasy? We know in the NFL, you need elite quarterbacks to win games, to win the Super Bowl. But in fantasy, you've been able to get by with mediocre quarterbacks. Is this now the trend in fantasy as well, where you really need elite quarterbacks to win your fantasy matchups as well?
And I think we've talked about it on this show. I know I've been thinking about it off air as well. Shouldn't quarterbacks be the top picks? Like, Travis Kelce should be number 1 from now on. Like, that to me, it's like, come on. And then shouldn't quarterbacks be taken in the first round, to your point about leading the way? And so I guess I've always thought, do we have to adjust the scoring at all for that to be the case? But it's kind of happening, at least to this point. I took Jonathan Taylor 2nd overall. We see how that's working out for me at the moment. We'll see. All right. We'll do one quick woulda, coulda, shoulda. And you mentioned the name, and we should have mentioned his name a lot earlier. Taysom Hill. What in the world? I mean, what an unbelievable performance for him. He's not a quarterback. He's not a tight end. He's not a running back. He's not a special teams blocker guy. What do they call those guys? The gunner or whatever. He's none of it. He's just a football player, and he's just a touchdown machine. He's a fantasy monster that you can't trust. You just can't. You can't expect it. And the woulda, coulda, shoulda for me was I had him on my bench, and then in other leagues, I decided not to pick him up. And I hate that I didn't pick him up because he was just kind of floating out there. And a few weeks ago, I went all in on him, and then he was a disappointment, and it kind of burned me. And so I only kept him in one league. And I looking back, I should have at least hung on to him, especially with the tight end position as watered down as it is after Kelce. That the value of Hill is there with if he has that tight end designation, which he should. Even though, yeah, again, I don't know what position he plays. He's just out there. He just give him the ball and go. But that was incredible. So, man, I wish I could have benefited from that, and unfortunately, I did not. Any woulda, coulda, shoulda for you, and then we'll jump into our breakout.
So before I get into woulda, coulda, shoulda, I want to go back to the QB conversation a little bit in fantasy about why QBs aren't taken in the first round. And I find it interesting because a lot, like we're advocating for QBs right now, but the fantasy community as a whole has done everything possible not to make QBs relevant. Touchdowns aren't worth 6 points now. Now they're worth 4 for QBs. Now you need 30 yards passing to get a point instead of 20. Now you lose points for sacks and interceptions as well. So we've almost nerfed QBs so much to make them not valuable, and then are mad at ourselves when our QBs are not putting up points. So I just think that's kind of funny that we've done everything possible to make them inefficient as fantasy players, and then are mad when they're inefficient as fantasy players. And then this week for me, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I started Gerald Everett over David Njoku. I switched them out literally 5 minutes before the game starts. Oh. Gerald Everett had 1.2 points. Njoku had over 15. And then again, Alvin Kamara had been really disappointing this season for me. I switched him out for Clyde Edwards-Helaire last minute because Clyde had a big, season so far. Clyde did nothing. Kamara had a huge game. So I'll probably make different decisions with those two players going into this week, but hopefully they'll do better, but it didn't hurt me too much this week as I still won my matchups.
There you go. 3-0 for Harrison. Got to feel good about that. Last thought on the quarterbacks. If a touchdown is worth 6 points, a touchdown is worth 6 points for quarterbacks. I can't stand that they've other leagues have done 4 points for a touchdown. Are you kidding me? It is worth 6 points. It's the one thing in fantasy that actually has a point value, other than field goal kickers if you have those. But so come on. Keep it at 6. So that's my take on that. All right, we'll get back to Harrison in just a little bit. We'll talk waiver wire, and we'll ask him if certain players are legit. But right now, we're going to do this week's breakout, and it's all about injuries. And we know that when football players sign up to play back at Pop Warner Football and throughout their whole career into the NFL, they know that injuries are a part of the game, that there is a risk for injuries, that they most likely will either have, small injuries, especially on Monday, they're going to be banged up. And then there are the season ending, the career ending, a lot of major injuries that take place, throughout their careers. And then same for us in fantasy. We know that when we draft players, and we do our best to avoid, like I was saying earlier, Rashad Penny, he's been too injury prone for me. So I try to avoid him. But then I listed off my team earlier. A bunch of guys are injured now, kind of on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis, but a lot of injuries, and it's hard to avoid them. And if some of you are feeling good through 5 weeks, you're 3, 4, 5 wins, and you're healthy, chances are injuries are coming. Your guys are going to get banged up. They're going to twist an ankle. They're going to land funny. They're going to get, a hamstring pull, whatever it is. Injuries take place throughout the NFL, and then they deal with the pain, the disappointment, and the missed opportunities. And we, to a lesser degree, as fantasy managers, deal with those same things. We're disappointed that our guys are out. They're not out there giving us fantasy points, and now we're left scrambling to figure out what to do with our lineups. And the key is we can't be delusional in thinking that our guys will never get injured, and that oh, well, I'll be healthy my fantasy team will be healthy all season long. It's unrealistic. That's not what this is. It's a long season, and we will go through certain weeks, especially where injuries hit us. And this parallels our own lives, because we all know we're not free from pain, suffering, disappointment, and missed opportunities. We all face quote unquote injuries throughout our lives. And I absolutely believe that God blesses his children and he allows us to enjoy life. But he never tells us that we won't experience setbacks and tough situations this side of heaven. And so as we're living in this broken world, we are going to have situations that cause us pain and suffering and disappointment and missed opportunities. And so it's going to be kind of a regular rhythm of this life, both minor and major injuries. But what we have to do is we have to learn to properly handle our responses. And, we can't even fully avoid. Now, we want to be wise, because certain injuries don't have to happen if we're wise and we avoid those things. But other things happen in life because of this broken world. And they're in many ways unavoidable. But the good news is God uses those things in our lives to strengthen us, so that when we do get back out there, so to speak, we're stronger, our faith is deeper. And so when we go through these seasons of injuries, who are we turning to? How are we handling it? And are we truly trusting and relying on God for his strength, his power to heal us, to give us the ability to persevere and to get through these things? And instead of feeling sorry for ourselves or whining or complaining or thinking, well, why do I have to deal with this injury? Well, this is life. Injuries are part of the deal. And so we can't be shocked when they happen, especially when it comes to things like persecution. And if we really want to be a follower of Jesus in this world, we're going to face those types of things too. Difficulties and challenges. They're all, God uses all of those things to strengthen us and ultimately for our good as well. And so making the decision to follow Jesus isn't so we have good health and lots of wealth, but because we need a savior and we desire to grow and become more like him and spend eternity with him. And so although we wish that we could completely avoid all struggles and trials, they actually refine us and strengthen us. And so when heartache and suffering comes into our lives, we can cling to what it says in John 16:33. Jesus says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. And so Jesus died on the cross. He rose again. He defeated sin and death. And then we, as followers of Jesus, receive his grace, his salvation. We're united to him. Eternity is secure in him. And so in the long run, we win. So the temporary suffering is just that. It's temporary. And so injuries play out differently for each of us, and they may affect multiple areas of our lives. But we have to remember that purpose and good can come from those big hits that cause us pain. And so Romans 8:18 says, this is Paul writing, "For I consider that the suffering of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." And Romans 5:3-5, "More than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us." And so that is the wonderful, good news and the hope that we have, that we can put our full trust and faith in Jesus. And so even Paul, he goes on to say, he goes, "I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And so it's in these weak moments that God gives us strength. It's his strength. We rely on his strength to get us through, and his glory shines through. And so today, as we consider our struggles and injuries and weaknesses, let's remember that God's grace is all we need. And so let's boldly ask him to strengthen us so that we can suffer well for his glory, and that we can get through these seasons of injuries, with hope, faith, and a reliance on him. So injuries are never fun. They're not fun in fantasy. They're not fun in real life. Today, I'm pretty discouraged about my fantasy team. But the season's still going. There's still hope. And today, whatever we may be facing, in the long run, if we've placed our faith in Jesus, for our salvation, man, we're good. He's overcome the world, so we're with him. I'm on that team. So that's the good news for us today. All right, Harrison, any thoughts on injuries and maybe what's your biggest concern with injuries through 5 weeks?
Yeah, so injuries are obviously a terrible thing that you have to deal with every single season in the NFL. But one thing that I think is interesting this year is sort of the rate of injuries compared to years in the past. Now, I noticed that during the offseason, the NFL loved to make a huge deal about how there was a record low number of concussions last year in the NFL, and there wasn't a single concussion this year during the preseason because there was a lot less contact, and how that was all great for the game. But now it feels like through the first couple of weeks, there has been so many injuries and so many concussions, and like I can't remember ever watching this many football games and seeing like 3 or 4 guys go down each game, both on offense and defense. It is just prolific how many injuries there's been so far. So I don't know how you were talking about not avoiding injuries and kind of embracing them and knowing this is a part of life. Have NFL teams, during the offseason having a lot less contact we've seen? Is this affecting, going from 0 contact to 100 once we get into the season, not being prepared for the season to start? Kind of like how we talked about a few episodes ago about QBs not playing in the offseason, or Ezekiel Elliott saying he's just going to skip the preseason. But then we've kind of seen that maybe he should have played in the preseason because he hasn't been completely ready. So what is your take on, even though you don't want anyone to get injured in the preseason, putting your guys out there, having the contact in practice, because it will ultimately prepare you for the, brutal contact you're going to face during the regular season?
Yeah, I'm an advocate for the preseason. So I was one of the lone people that understood and appreciated what the preseason is. And so, yeah, you take one away, and I don't think their bodies are prepared for hitting it into that final gear and the hits that come. And so that's why we're seeing the offense is off to such a slow start too. And that's why I keep hammering, don't give up on your star guys just yet, because things eventually should click for the elite offenses. And so, I do think teams like the Rams that went all in on top talent that maybe don't have the depth, once a guy here or there gets injured, they're in trouble. And there are, kind of a few teams like that. You want depth. You want three guys in your running back committee. You're going to be better off in the long run, actually, versus even having a workhorse that you're going to try to count on for 16 games. It's going to be rare. I just don't think we're going to see that. And same with the quarterback room. I mean, think about the Panthers. It's like they have four quarterbacks. Like, hey, we got too many quarterbacks around here. Well, now three of them are out. So PJ Walker is the last man standing. So you got to have depth at quarterback too, because there was a trend there for a while where teams were only carrying two quarterbacks. Can't do that anymore. We're seeing quarterbacks go down left and right as well, or at least banged up and needing some time to heal. So yeah, it's fascinating. Injuries it's a part of the deal. There's no getting around it. So that means we have to work the waiver wire in a big way. And so as we head to the waiver wire, a couple of the names that jump out this week, especially at the running back position: Kenneth Walker, Brian Robinson, Joshua Kelly, Jaylen Warren, Eno Benjamin. Which of those guys are you most excited about? I'll just say this. So Joshua Kelly, he was on the Unpacking It podcast earlier this year. Huge fan of Joshua Kelly. One of my favorite guests in a long time. Was so excited to see him have a big game alongside Austin Eckler. And there may be space for both of them to contribute. Probably not that much every week. They were playing the Browns, even though the Browns have had a decent defense at times. But I like Kelly. Kelly should be rostered. And if anything does happen to Eckler, you want him. But for you, who are some of the running backs you're most intrigued by?
Yeah, so Kenneth Walker should already be on rosters in most leagues, but just in case, the guy who drafted him dropped him, go look and see if he's there, because if he is, you should throw a huge amount of your fab budget on him, make him your number one priority, because he is going to be a stud for the rest of the season now that Rashad Penny is out. And same thing with Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson, a lot of people forgot about him because of, the incidents where he was, shot and then had to miss the first couple of weeks of the season. But unbelievable comeback, incredible story for him, getting back on the field this quickly and recovering. And he outcarried Antonio Gibson 9-3 in his first game back. Now, granted, it was extremely inefficient, but the fact that they put their trust in him that early in his first game back, I think he is going to be a really solid player for the rest of the season. We saw him produce in the preseason. He looked great. So I would really hope that he's going to have a great season. He's going up against the Bears this week on Thursday Night Football, which might be the worst football game of all time. I hate that I have to watch that game on Thursday night. But he should have a good week this week and for the rest of the season. And then another running back, Eno Benjamin. We talked about him a few weeks ago. Didn't produce a ton. But now James Conner and Darrell Williams both got injured this week for the Cardinals, which means Eno Benjamin, if they stay out, he is the lone running back in the backfield there. He should have a big game this week if they're both injured. And then one guy, if you're looking for a tight end that I'm starting to really rise on, is Daniel Bellinger, rookie tight end for the New York Giants. All of the Giants wide receivers are injured. We're talking about, should we pick up Richie James or should we pick up Darius Slayton, guys who have never been good? Why not go with the rookie tight end who's slowly becoming a top target there in New York? He's sneakily put up some good weeks these last few weeks. I think Daniel Bellinger could really have a solid season going forward as the only healthy receiving threat in the Giants offense.
Interesting. So the one guy I'm intrigued by is Alec Pierce. And you know that I'm all in on the Colts offense. And I think Pierce is the clear number 2 guy. He's a rookie. I think this offense is going to start going. I know it was ugly on Thursday night, but maybe it's just that one win in overtime. You get Jonathan Taylor back and maybe things turn the corner. This is a side note, I think Nick Foles needs to be considered. He's the backup there. I wouldn't rule out him having a run this year. So I'll say that. But don't avoid Alec Pierce just because he's on the Colts. He's a good player, and they drafted him high, the second round maybe. So there's some talent there for sure, and he had a good game on Thursday night. All right, lastly, as we wrap things up today, we're going to ask Harrison 3 different players. Is he legit? All right, De'Ami Brown in Washington. We're all avoiding Washington. But wait, Carson Wentz, he's one of the top quarterbacks throwing in fantasy. He's putting up huge numbers. Multiple wide receivers have had big games. So what about Brown? Is he legit?
So as a player, I would say De'Ami Brown is legit. He's an electric player, superb deep threat. We saw it when he was at UNC. We saw it in a couple preseason games, but never really got a chance in the offense just because he's been buried on the depth chart. This week, Jahan Dotson was injured, so he finally got the opportunity and showed out. I would not trust him as a fantasy player if he is still the fourth wide receiver there in both Jahan and Terry and Curtis Samuel are healthy as well, because there's not enough opportunity. But if one of those guys goes down, I think you could probably pick him up and start him in your flex with confidence because of his deep threat ability. He just needs to find a way onto the field, and when he does, he'll produce. So it's all about the injuries in front of him and where the roster shakes out week to week. But if he is one of the top three guys for Washington, he is a legit fantasy player.
All right. So I watched the Panthers 49ers, and Jeff Wilson was solid, but Tevin Coleman, kind of out of the blue, was a big-time contributor for the 49ers. Is he legit?
I would say that he is. He's still got it. I was surprised that he was even still playing football, because it seems like so long ago when he was one of the better running backs that the 49ers had. But I guess he just kind of stuck around. He was on the Jets for a little bit. But a lot of his, involvement came from both Tyrion Davis-Price and Marlon Mack getting injured this week. But neither of those guys had really done anything to solidify roles in the offense. Tevin Coleman comes in and is great. So I would not be surprised if going into next week, even if Marlon Mack and Davis-Price are healthy, that Coleman is the number two guy there in the offense. We know the 49ers love to use the running back by committee system. And what's great about Coleman is he's not competing with Jeff Wilson for the same type of touches. Jeff Wilson is a downhill, running back, not really involved in the pass game, while Tevin Coleman's more of an out of the backfield, at this point in his career, kind of gadget guy, use him in the pass game, get the ball into his hands in space. So I think there's a way for them to both work together in the offense. He brings a different dimension to the backfield than a guy like Marlon Mack does. So I would say he's a legit contributor going forward.
All right, last one, and I'll even expand this out. So Darius Slayton had a nice game for the Giants. So is he legit? And basically, is any New York Giants wide receiver legit, or it's just going to be roll the dice every single week?
I do not think Darius Slayton is legit. He was someone that was maybe going to get cut in the offseason. They were looking to trade him, but he does this every single year where, Giants receivers go down. He comes in, he has a nice little 5 receptions for 70-yard gains. Like, oh, maybe Darius Slayton, there's something here. He's never going to be the guy in New York. The Giants receivers are going to get healthy at some point. I like Daniel Bellinger. I do not think he's going to have an every game role with the Giants. I think it was kind of a 1 week thing because he was the only receiver available. And talking about if wide receivers are legit, I think, Wan'Dale Robinson and Kadarius Toney, they haven't done anything so far this season, but we know they're great players. They just need to get on the field. And I think there might be something there. I don't have any faith in picking both of them up right now. But I know when it's like week 10, when they probably get healthy again, and we see Kadarius Toney has 7 catches for 140 yards, or Wan'Dale Robinson has 5 catches for 100, we're going to be like, we knew it. We knew there was opportunity there. We knew there was talent, but it was just too risky to pick them up because you just don't even know if they're going to play every week.
Yeah, they may be stash guys if you have a deep bench. You're just kind of, some dark throw. But yeah, the Giants keep winning. I don't know how they do it. It's amazing. It's remarkable. Not sure it continues or how reliable they are from a fantasy standpoint, but good for them to be 4-1. Well, that's it for today's show. Great stuff from Harrison. Appreciate you. Congrats on a 3-0 week. I'm hungry for an undefeated week. That was not the case for me this week in the Unpacking It League. Lost to the top guy, Reed. He continues to be undefeated, 5-0. So impressive for him. I like my team. I still like my teams across the board. Got to get healthy. So today, all about injuries and the encouragement, of course, for all of us that no matter what injuries we have in life right now, let's continue to trust God. Let's continue to rely on his strength and power in our lives to continue to persevere and endure and trust that he's using those things to build our faith and ultimately for our good. And so refining us, developing our character, developing our trust in him through the injury process. And it's hard. It really is. But be encouraged and keep looking up and keep looking into the word, God's word for hope, for sure. Well, for Harrison, I'm Bryce. I'm a sports fan and a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans and fantasy managers who follow Jesus together. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast presented by Medi-Share.